The crystal chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like diamonds as wealthy politicians, celebrities, business tycoons, and cartel associates laughed loudly around expensive tables filled with wine and gold-plated dishes. Classical music floated through the luxurious Kang mansion while servants moved carefully between the guests. Then suddenly, a sharp childish scream shattered the entire hall. "Stop treating my mommy like a maid." Every head turned instantly. A 6-year-old Korean girl stood trembling on the decorated stage, gripping a silver microphone with both hands. Tears rolled down her small face. Beside her, her twin sister pointed toward the center of the ballroom. "That's not a servant," she cried. "That's our mommy." The room froze. At the center of the marble floor, a Nigerian woman wearing a black maid uniform slowly lifted her head from the spilled wine she had been cleaning. Her hands were trembling. The white cloth in her fingers was stained red, not just from wine, from blood. Gasps spread across the hall. "Wait, that woman is Min-Jun's wife? The Mafia boss married the maid?" "No, impossible." The woman's exhausted eyes filled with tears as whispers swallowed the room. Near the front table, Kang Min-Jun slowly stood from his chair. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. For years he had stayed silent. But now his daughters were crying before hundreds of powerful people, and his wife was kneeling on the floor like a servant. At the head of the ballroom, Madame Kang's cold expression finally cracked. "Ji-woo," she warned dangerously. "Put that microphone down." But the little girl shook her head violently. "No." Seo-yeon hugged her sister tightly and looked directly at the guests. "Grandmother makes mommy cook every night. Mummy cries alone in the kitchen. Mummy's hands hurt because of grandmother." The guests stared at Kemi in disbelief. Kemi lowered her eyes immediately. "Please," she whispered weakly. "Girls, stop talking." But Ji-woo suddenly screamed louder. "Daddy, help mommy." That sentence pierced through Min-Jun like a knife. The ballroom became completely silent. Even the violinists stopped playing. One elderly businessman whispered to another, "She really is the wife. Then why is she dressed like that?" Kemi slowly tried standing, but dizziness slammed into her instantly. Her vision blurred. She staggered. Min-Jun rushed forward. "Kemi!" Before he could reach her, her body collapsed violently onto the marble floor. The twins screamed. Guests jumped from their seats. Wine glasses shattered. Min-Jun caught Kemi just before her head struck the ground. Her body felt frighteningly light in his arms. "Kemi," he shouted desperately. "Kemi, open your eyes." But she did not move. The twins ran toward their mother, crying hysterically. "Mummy, Mummy, wake up." Seo-yeon grabbed her mother's burned hand and burst into tears. "It's bleeding again." Several guests looked horrified. Madame Kang stood frozen beside the birthday cake. For the first time in years, she looked unsure of herself. Min-Jun slowly lifted his head toward his mother. His eyes burned with anger.
And pain.
Years of pain. Then finally, in front of the entire hall, he spoke the words nobody ever expected to hear. "She is my wife." Nobody moved. "She is not a maid." His voice became harder. "She is the mother of my daughters. And from today onward, nobody in this family will disrespect her again." Madame Kang's face darkened instantly. "You dare speak to me like this?" But Min-Jun ignored her. He carried Kemi into his arms while the twins clung to him crying. "Call the hospital now," he roared. Bodyguards immediately rushed into action. Guests whispered nervously as Min-Jun stormed out of the ballroom carrying his unconscious wife. Ji-woo turned back once before leaving. Her tearful eyes locked onto Madame Kang. "You hurt our mommy," she whispered. Then the doors slammed shut. The entire mansion remained silent. And for the first time in decades, Madame Kang realized she might finally be losing control of her family. 3 months earlier, rain poured heavily across Seoul University while students hurried through the campus, carrying umbrellas. Near the medical building, a young Nigerian student struggled against the wind while protecting a stack of books against her chest. Kemi Okafor sighed tiredly. She had just finished a long shift at a small restaurant before attending her evening classes. Her shoes were soaked. Her phone battery was dead. And she still had 2 assignments waiting for her. But despite the exhaustion on her face, her eyes remained warm and determined. As she hurried past a dark side road near the parking structure, sudden shouting stopped her. "Get him! Don't let him escape!" Kemi froze. 3 men dressed in black were chasing a young Korean man through the rain. Blood stained the side of his white shirt. The moment he turned the corner, Kemi saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. One of the attackers suddenly pulled out a knife. Without thinking, Kemi grabbed the frightened man's wrist. "This way." She dragged him behind a maintenance door and quickly locked it. Heavy footsteps thundered past outside. The stranger leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Blood dripped from his arm. Kemi stared at him in shock. Even injured, the man looked powerful. Expensive watch, sharp jawline, cold eyes. But beneath the coldness, she saw something unexpected. Loneliness. "You should leave," he said quietly. "It's dangerous here." Kemi ignored him and removed her scarf. "You're bleeding badly." "It's nothing." She frowned. "You could die from nothing. Sit down." For a moment, the stranger looked surprised that she was giving him orders. But strangely, he obeyed. Kemi carefully tied the scarf around his wound. "You should go to the hospital." "I can't." "Why?" The stranger remained silent. Outside, distant thunder echoed. Then suddenly, headlights flashed through the small window. Black SUVs. The stranger's expression darkened immediately. "They found me." Kemi looked nervous. "Who are those people?" He stared at her quietly before answering. "People who want me dead." Before Kemi could respond, loud footsteps approached the door. Bang! Someone hit the metal entrance violently. "Boss, are you inside?" Kemi jumped. The stranger sighed deeply. Then he slowly stood. "You saved my life tonight." Kemi blinked. "What?" He looked directly into her eyes. "My name is Kang Min-Jun." The moment he said his name, Kemi's face changed. Even international students knew the Kang family. Wealth, power, fear. Rumors connected them to dangerous businesses across Asia. And standing in front of her, bleeding quietly in the rain, was the heir to that empire. Min-Jun noticed the fear on her face. "You regret helping me now?" Kemi looked at his wound again. Then she shook her head softly. "No." For the first time that night, Kang Min-Jun smiled. If this story is already pulling you in emotionally, take a moment now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Protect Kemi. Because what this woman was about to endure for love would leave millions heartbroken. The rain continued falling outside the small maintenance room as Min-Jun stared quietly at Kemi. Most people avoided him. Some feared him. Others only wanted his family's power. But this strange Nigerian girl had protected him without even knowing who he was. And somehow that unsettled him. Kemi stepped back nervously. "You should really go before those people break the door." Min-Jun looked toward the entrance. "They're my security team." Kemi blinked. "You're what?" Before she could say another word, the metal door burst open. Several large men in black suits rushed inside. "Boss." Their eyes instantly landed on Kemi. One bodyguard moved protectively in front of Min-Jun. "Who is she?" Kemi quickly raised both hands. "I didn't do anything." To her surprise, Min-Jun spoke calmly. "She saved my life." The room became silent. The bodyguards exchanged shocked looks. Nobody saved Kang Min-Jun. People usually waited for him to save them. Min-Jun slowly removed Kemi's scarf from his wound. Blood had soaked through the fabric. "You ruined your scarf." Kemi shrugged awkwardly. "It's old anyway." Min-Jun stared at her again. Everything about her looked simple. Cheap shoes, worn-out backpack, tired eyes. But there was dignity in the way she stood. Strength. One bodyguard stepped closer. "Boss, Madame Kang is already furious. We need to leave now." The mention of his mother immediately hardened Min-Jun's expression. Kemi noticed the change instantly. "Your mother?" He gave a short nod. "She controls everything." Something about the way he said it sounded less like respect and more like exhaustion. Minutes later, black SUVs disappeared into the rainy Seoul streets. Kemi watched them leave from beneath the small building shelter. Then she laughed softly to herself. What kind of crazy night was this? She had no idea that meeting would completely change her life. Over the following weeks, Min-Jun kept appearing around campus unexpectedly. Sometimes near the library, sometimes near the cafeteria, sometimes outside the small restaurant where Kemi worked part-time. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Until one evening he sat quietly at her table while she studied. "You're following me," she accused. Min-Jun looked completely serious. "I'm observing you." Kemi burst into laughter. "Observing me for what?" He leaned back slightly. "I still don't understand why you helped me." Kemi shrugged. "You were injured. You didn't know me. So, you weren't afraid?" Kemi smiled faintly. "I was terrified." For the first time in years, Min-Jun found himself genuinely enjoying someone's company. Not because of business. Not because of power. Not because of fear. Just peace. Slowly, they became inseparable. Kemi helped him study. She forced him to eat properly. She teased him whenever he acted cold. And strangely, Min-Jun began smiling more. His bodyguards noticed. Even his father noticed. But the one person who noticed most was Madame Kang. One evening inside the enormous Kang mansion, Madame Kang sat at the head of a long dining table while servants poured tea carefully. Her sharp eyes focused on Min-Jun. "You've been distracted lately." Min-Jun remained calm. "I'm handling business properly." "That is not what I ask." The room became tense immediately. Madame Kang slowly placed her teacup down. "There is a girl." Not even a question. A statement. Min-Jun's father lowered his eyes silently. Nobody challenged Madame Kang directly. Min-Jun finally answered. "Yes." "What family does she come from?" "She's a student." Madame Kang's eyes narrowed. "That was not my question." Min-Jun stayed quiet. Then finally, "She's Nigerian." The entire room froze. One servant accidentally dropped a spoon. Madame Kang's expression became dangerously cold. "A foreigner?" Min-Jun said nothing. "A poor foreign student." Still silence. Then suddenly Madame Kang laughed. But there was no warmth in the sound. "You must be joking." "She makes me happy." Madame Kang's face darkened instantly. "Love does not build empires. She saved my life. And now you think that means she deserves this family's name?" Min-Jun clenched his jaw. "She deserves respect." Madame Kang slammed her hand against the table. "Respect." The servants flinched. "I built this empire from blood and sacrifice. You think I suffered for decades so my son could marry a poor African waitress?" "She is not a waitress. She works in a restaurant. She studies international business." Madame Kang stood slowly. Her presence alone terrified the room. "You will end this relationship immediately." "No." Even Min-Jun's father looked shocked. Nobody told Madame Kang no. Ever. Her eyes sharpened dangerously. "You dare disobey me?" Min-Jun slowly stood as well. "I love her." For a brief second, pain crossed Madame Kang's face. Then it vanished beneath cold fury. "You are weak." Without another word, she walked away. But from that day onward, Kemi became a target. The pressure started quietly. Kemi's restaurant manager suddenly fired her. Her apartment rent increased unexpectedly. Scholarship delays began appearing mysteriously. One evening, Kemi sat outside campus fighting tears while calculating bills. Min-Jun found her there. "What happened?" She forced a smile. "Nothing." He took the papers gently from her hands. The moment he saw the numbers, his face hardened. "My mother." Kemi looked confused. "What?" "She's trying to force you away." Kemi stared at him silently. Then finally, "She hates me that much?" Min-Jun's expression filled with guilt. Kemi looked away quickly. "I don't want problems between you and your family. You are not the problem, but I am the reason." Min-Jun grabbed her hand. "No." For the first time, his voice sounded desperate. "I spent my whole life trapped inside that family. You're the only person who ever made me feel human." Kemi's eyes softened. "But your mother will never accept me." Min-Jun remained silent, because deep down, he knew she was right. Months later, Min-Jun brought Kemi to a high-profile charity gala. The moment they entered together, whispers spread instantly. That's her? The foreign girl? She's beautiful, but Madame Kang will never allow this. Kemi felt dozens of judgmental eyes following her. Then suddenly the ballroom doors opened. Madame Kang entered. Elegant, powerful, untouchable. The entire room bowed respectfully. Her eyes immediately landed on Kemi, and the atmosphere changed. Madame Kang approached slowly. Kemi politely bowed. It's an honor to finally meet you properly, ma'am. Madame Kang looked her up and down, then smiled coldly. You speak Korean well. Thank you. You hide your accent carefully. Kemi sensed the insult beneath the words. Still, she remained respectful. Madame Kang suddenly turned toward nearby elites. This girl saved my son once. Several people smiled politely. Then Madame Kang added, now she believes that qualifies her to marry him. The surrounding guests laughed awkwardly. Kemi's face fell. Min-Jun immediately stepped forward. Mother. But Madame Kang ignored him. Young lady, do you know what this family owns? Kemi answered softly. I never cared about money. Madame Kang's smile vanished instantly. That is exactly what poor people always say. The words hit Kemi like a slap. Silence spread around them. Min-Jun's anger exploded. That's enough. The entire ballroom turned toward him. Nobody had ever raised their voice at Madame Kang publicly. Her eyes slowly met his. And for the first time, a silent war truly began inside the Kang family. If you're already angry at Madame Kang, comment below right now. Respect Kemi. And don't forget to subscribe, because this family war was only beginning. After the charity gala humiliation, Kemi avoided Min-Jun for almost a week. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she finally understood something terrifying. Loving Kang Min-Jun meant going to war against an empire. One evening, she sat quietly inside the university library pretending to study, while her thoughts spiraled endlessly. Madame Kang's words echoed inside her head. That is exactly what poor people always say. Kemi closed her eyes painfully. She had worked too hard all her life to escape pity. Growing up in Nigeria, she watched her mother sell food under the burning sun just to keep the family alive. She remembered studying under candlelight during power outages, remembered hunger, remembered humiliation. And now, after fighting so hard to build a future, she was being reduced to the poor African girl. Found you. Kemi looked up. Min-Jun stood near the bookshelf, wearing a dark coat. You've been avoiding me. She forced a weak smile. I've been busy. You're a terrible liar. Kemi sighed deeply. Your mother is right. Min-Jun's face hardened instantly. Don't. She's powerful, Min-Jun. Your family is powerful. I don't belong in that world. You belong wherever I choose. That's exactly the problem. Several students turned toward them. Kemi lowered her voice quickly. You can survive that family, because you were born into it. But me. Her eyes filled with tears. They will destroy me. Min-Jun walked closer slowly. Then, unexpectedly, he knelt beside her chair. Kemi stared at him in shock. I spent my whole life obeying my mother, he said quietly. She controls every decision, every business move, every relationship. His voice became softer. But when I'm with you, I finally breathe. Kemi looked away emotionally. You don't understand how terrifying your mother is. Min-Jun gave a bitter smile. No one understands better than me. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Min-Jun reached into his pocket. Kemi frowned. What are you doing? He placed a small ring box on the table. Her eyes widened instantly. Min-Jun, I know my family won't approve. He opened the box slowly. But I'm done asking for permission. Inside sat a beautiful diamond ring. Kemi's breathing became uneven. Are you serious? Min-Jun nodded. Marry me. Tears rolled down Kemi's face immediately. You're crazy. A faint smile appeared on Min-Jun's lips. I know. You could lose everything. I already lost myself years ago. Kemi covered her mouth emotionally. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. For the first time in many years, Kang Min-Jun looked genuinely happy. But inside the Kang mansion, Madame Kang's fury became uncontrollable. She said yes. The servant standing before her trembled violently. Yes, madam. Madame Kang threw a glass teacup across the room. It shattered against the wall. Her husband flinched quietly. This is your fault, she snapped. He lowered his head immediately. You always let the boy behave emotionally. He loves her, her husband said carefully. Madame Kang turned sharply. Love. Her voice dripped with disgust. Love made people weak. Love destroys empires. She stepped toward the massive window overlooking Seoul. I built this family from nothing. Politicians bow to us. Corporations fear us. Her expression darkened. And now my son wants to throw away our bloodline for a poor foreign girl. She may not be what you expected, her husband replied cautiously, but she seems kind. Madame Kang's eyes flashed dangerously. Kindness does not rule the world. Then colder. Power does. Meanwhile, wedding preparations moved forward quietly. Min-Jun insisted on keeping things private. He knew his mother would try stopping the ceremony completely. Kemi often looked nervous during the process. One afternoon, while trying on a simple wedding dress, she stared at herself in the mirror silently. Her best friend smiled. You look beautiful. Kemi's eyes filled with uncertainty. Do you think love is enough? Her friend paused. For normal families? Maybe. Then gently. But Min-Jun's family isn't normal. Kemi lowered her eyes. I'm scared. You should be. Kemi laughed weakly through tears. That's not comforting. But you still love him. Kemi smiled softly. Yes. And he loves you? With everything he has. Her friend squeezed her shoulder. Then fight for it. The wedding took place quietly inside a private chapel outside Seoul. Only a few trusted people attended. No media. No publicity. No giant celebration. Kemi wore a simple white gown. Min-Jun could barely take his eyes off her. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful, until the chapel doors suddenly opened. Every person in the room froze. Madame Kang entered slowly. Elegant black dress. Cold expression. Absolute authority. Kemi's hands immediately began shaking. Min-Jun stepped protectively beside her. Mother. Madame Kang ignored him completely. Instead, she walked directly toward Kemi. The entire chapel became silent. Then Madame Kang spoke softly. But somehow her calm voice felt more terrifying than shouting. Do you truly believe you can survive in my family? Kemi swallowed nervously. I love your son. That was not my question. Silence. Madame Kang's eyes scanned Kemi carefully. You come from poverty. Kemi remained quiet. You were raised differently. You do not understand our world. Kemi finally gathered courage. Then teach me. Several guests looked shocked. Madame Kang stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. But it was not kindness. It was warning. You will regret this marriage. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The tension inside the chapel remained heavy even after she disappeared. Kemi looked emotionally shaken. Min-Jun held her hand tightly. You don't have to do this. Kemi looked at him. Then slowly. Yes, I do. The ceremony continued. And by sunset, Kemi Okafor officially became Kang Kemi. But from the very first day of marriage, Madame Kang made her hatred painfully clear. The mansion staff were instructed never to call Kemi Madam. Only Miss Kemi. At family dinners, Kemi was intentionally seated far from Min-Jun. When elite guests visited the mansion, Madame Kang introduced Kemi as my son's foreign companion, not wife. Never wife. Kemi endured everything quietly, because she loved Min-Jun, and because every night after the mansion finally became silent, Min-Jun held her gently and apologized. I'm sorry. Kemi would smile weakly. It's okay. But slowly, the emotional pressure began crushing him too. One night, Min-Jun entered his office and found his father drinking alone quietly. You should sleep, Min-Jun said. His father laughed bitterly. I used to say that to myself too. Min-Jun frowned. What do you mean? His father stared into his glass. Your mother wasn't always like this. Min-Jun looked surprised. She grew up in terrible poverty after the war. She watched people disrespect her family because they had nothing. He sighed heavily. So, she decided money would protect her forever. And now? His father gave a painful smile. Now she fears losing control more than losing people. Min-Jun remained silent. Then slowly, she's hurting Kemi. His father nodded sadly. I know. Then why doesn't anyone stop her? The older man looked directly at his son. Because everyone in this family learned long ago that surviving your mother is easier than fighting her. That sentence stayed in Min-Jun's mind for days. And deep inside, he began realizing something terrifying. If he continued remaining silent, Kemi would eventually break. If this story is breaking your heart already, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves emotional family dramas. And comment below. Min-Jun must protect his wife. The first year of marriage felt like walking through a beautiful prison. From the outside, Kemi appeared to have everything. Luxury cars, designer clothes, massive mansions, servants, status. But inside the walls of the Kang Empire, she quickly learned one painful truth. Nothing belonged to her, not even peace. Every morning before sunrise, Madame Kang expected Kemi to greet her personally. Every meal had to meet impossible standards. Every movement was watched. Every mistake became humiliation. One morning, Kemi carefully prepared breakfast for an important business meeting. Several executives sat around the long dining table while Madame Kang inspected the dishes silently. Then suddenly, this soup is too salty. Kemi blinked. I followed the recipe exactly. Madame Kang slowly placed the spoon down. Are you calling me a liar? The executives lowered their heads immediately. Kemi swallowed nervously. No, mother. Madame Kang stood. Then, without warning, she poured the bowl directly into the trash. Make it again. Kemi quietly apologized and carried the dishes away. The executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Even they felt the cruelty. But nobody dared interfere. As the months passed, the punishments became more subtle, crueler. Whenever elite visitors entered the mansion, Madame Kang ordered Kemi to remain upstairs. You embarrass the family image. During business dinners, Kemi was treated like invisible staff. At public events, Madame Kang walked between Min-Jun and Kemi to separate them physically. And every time Min-Jun attempted to defend his wife, his mother retaliated emotionally. You are choosing a woman over your bloodline. You are becoming weak. You disappoint me. Eventually, Min-Jun began spending longer hours at work, not because he stopped loving Kemi, but because home became war. Kemi noticed it immediately. One rainy night, she waited alone in their bedroom while untouched dinner grew cold beside her. When Min-Jun finally entered after midnight, exhaustion covered his face. You didn't eat again, Kemi said softly. I had meetings. With your mother? Min-Jun loosened his ties silently. Kemi looked down. She hates me more every day. Min-Jun sat beside her. She'll calm down eventually. Kemi looked at him sadly. You don't even believe that. He remained silent. That silence hurt more than words. A year later, Kemi discovered she was pregnant. The moment she saw the test results, tears filled her eyes. Not from fear. From hope. Maybe a child would finally bring the family together. Maybe Madame Kang would soften. Maybe things could change. When she told Min-Jun, his entire face lit up. For the first time in months, genuine happiness returned to his eyes. A baby? Kemi laughed emotionally while nodding. Min-Jun pulled her into his arms immediately. No, he whispered. Not just a baby. He touched her stomach carefully. Our future. For a brief moment, life felt beautiful again, until Madame Kang heard the news. A giant family dinner was organized. Business partners attended. Political allies attended. Champagne flowed across the massive ballroom. Madame Kang stood proudly before the guests. My family will finally have an heir. Kemi smiled nervously beside Min-Jun. Then Madame Kang added, a grandson. The guests applauded politely. Kemi glanced at Min-Jun uneasily. Later that night inside their bedroom, Kemi spoke quietly. What if it's a girl? Min-Jun kissed her forehead. Then I'll love her exactly the same. But your mother won't. Min-Jun did not answer. Months passed. Kemi's pregnancy became difficult. Despite medical advice, Madame Kang continued forcing her to handle exhausting household responsibilities. Women in this family do not behave weakly. Kemi cooked, cleaned, hosted guests, attended events, smiled through exhaustion. One evening, while carrying heavy decoration boxes during a banquet preparation, Kemi suddenly lost balance. A servant gasped, "Madam." The boxes crashed onto the floor. Min-Jun immediately rushed toward her. "Kemi," he helped her sit down carefully. "You shouldn't be lifting these." Before Kemi could respond, Madame Kang spoke coldly. She dropped them because she was careless. Min-Jun stared at his mother in disbelief. She's pregnant, and women have been pregnant for centuries. Mother, if she cannot handle simple responsibilities now, how will she handle becoming the wife of this family properly? Kemi grabbed Min-Jun's wrist gently. Please, she whispered, don't fight. But deep inside, something inside Min-Jun cracked further. Several months later, the twins were born. Twin girls. Healthy. Beautiful. Tiny fingers. Tiny cries. And unmistakably Korean features inherited from their father. The moment Min-Jun held them, tears entered his eyes. They're perfect. Kemi smiled weakly from the hospital bed. Meet Ji-woo and Seo-yeon. Min-Jun kissed both babies carefully. My daughters. But outside the hospital room, Madame Kang's face remained expressionless. Girls? The doctor nodded carefully. Yes, madam. Madame Kang looked away immediately. How disappointing. Even the nurse looked uncomfortable. Inside the room, Kemi overheard everything. Her heart shattered silently. That night, while holding the sleeping twins, Kemi cried quietly. Min-Jun sat beside her helplessly. She hates them already, Kemi whispered. No. She wanted sons. They are still my children, but not the heir she wanted. Min-Jun looked at his daughters sleeping peacefully, then at his exhausted wife. Guilt swallowed him completely. As the twins grew older, Madame Kang's behavior worsened. The girls received expensive gifts, elite tutors, luxury, but emotionally, Madame Kang treated them more like future business assets than grandchildren. And Kemi became little more than household labor. By the twins' 5th birthday, the mansion staff secretly whispered about her. She works harder than the servants. She barely sleeps. She still cooks personally for Madame Kang every morning. Some staff admired Kemi quietly, because despite years of humiliation, she remained kind. She learned everyone's names. She thanked cleaners personally. She secretly paid medical bills for one elderly cook. And whenever staff made mistakes, she protected them from Madame Kang's anger. That kindness slowly changed the mansion. People respected her. Even bodyguards. One afternoon, a young maid accidentally broke an expensive vase. The girl immediately burst into tears. Madame Kang will fire me. Kemi quickly helped her clean the mess. Don't cry. But I can't afford to lose this job. Kemi gently touched her shoulder. I'll handle it. Minutes later, Madame Kang entered the room. Her eyes instantly landed on the shattered pieces. Who did this? The young maid trembled violently. Kemi stepped forward calmly. I did. Madame Kang narrowed her eyes. Careless. Kemi bowed slightly. I apologize. Madame Kang stared at her silently. Then coldly, you will repay it from your personal allowance. After she walked away, the young maid looked at Kemi in shock. Why would you do that for me? Kemi smiled softly. Because I know what it feels like to be powerless. Unfortunately, the twins overheard everything. That night during dinner, Ji-woo suddenly looked at her grandmother. Grandmother, why do you always scold mommy? The room became dangerously quiet. Min-Jun looked nervous immediately. Madame Kang placed her chopsticks down slowly. Children should not interrupt adults. But mommy is always sad. Seo-yeon nodded innocently. And mommy cries sometimes. Kemi's face turned pale. Girls, eat your food. But Jiwoo kept staring at Madame Kang. Why don't you like mommy? Madame Kang's eyes hardened. She is too emotional. She's nice. Seo-yeon argued. She hugs us every night. Kemi quickly tried changing the subject. But Madame Kang suddenly stood. I'm tired. She walked away without another word. The twins looked confused. Min-Jun lowered his eyes silently. And Kemi felt something terrifying growing slowly inside the mansion. The children were beginning to notice everything. And, eventually, children who noticed pain also learned how to expose it. If you're still watching, it means this story has touched your heart already. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it. And tell us in the comments, should Min-Jun finally stand up to his mother? By the time the twins turned 6, the Kang mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage. Every smile was controlled. Every dinner felt rehearsed. Every conversation carried hidden tension. And Kemi had become an expert at pretending she was fine. Every morning before sunrise, she quietly slipped out of bed so she would not wake the twins. She tied her hair neatly, covered the burn scars on her hands with makeup, then disappeared into the giant mansion kitchen before the servants arrived. Sometimes she cooked alone for hours. Sometimes she prepared food for political gatherings with over 100 guests. Sometimes she stood so long her legs trembled. But no matter how exhausted she became, she still smiled whenever Jiwoo and Seo-yeon hugged her. Those girls were the only reason she kept going. One cold morning before dawn, Seo-yeon quietly walked downstairs searching for water. As she approached the kitchen, she suddenly froze. Kemi stood near the stove trying to hide pain while cold water ran over her burned hand. Fresh red blisters covered her skin. Mummy, Kemi jumped immediately. Seo-yeon? Why are you awake? The little girl walked closer slowly. Your hand is hurt again. Kemi quickly hid it behind her back. It's nothing. Seo-yeon frowned. But it always hurts. Kemi forced a smile. Cooking accidents happen. The child looked unconvinced. Before she could ask more questions, Jiwoo suddenly entered the kitchen too. Mummy. She immediately noticed the tears in Kemi's eyes. Why are you crying? Kemi wiped her face quickly. I'm not crying. Jiwoo looked at the stove, then at the injured hand, then quietly. Did grandmother shout at you again? Kemi's heart dropped. The twins were seeing too much now. She quickly knelt beside them. Listen to me carefully. The girls stared at her. Grandmother loves this family in her own way. Jiwoo shook her head stubbornly. She doesn't love you. The honesty in the child's voice pierced Kemi deeply. That same afternoon, preparations began for Madame Kang's massive birthday celebration. It would be the largest event hosted by the family all year. Politicians, corporate leaders, foreign investors, crime associates pretending to be businessmen. Every important connection of the Kang Empire would attend. Madame Kang personally supervised every detail, and, naturally, most of the responsibility fell onto Kemi. Flowers need replacing. The guest list changed. The ballroom decorations look cheap. The menu is unacceptable. For 3 straight days, Kemi barely slept. She coordinated decorators, prepared meals, managed seating arrangements, reviewed security logistics, and still cared for the twins personally. One exhausted maid whispered to another, "How is Madame Kemi still standing? She works harder than everyone." Unfortunately, Madame Kang overheard them. Her expression darkened instantly. She works because that is expected of her. The maids lowered their heads immediately. That evening, Min-Jun finally returned home after a long overseas business trip. The twins ran into his arms excitedly. "Daddy." Min-Jun smiled warmly while hugging them. "My princesses." But as his eyes scanned the mansion, his smile faded. "Kemi?" One servant hesitated nervously. "She's still working in the ballroom, sir." Min-Jun frowned. "At this hour?" He walked quickly toward the ballroom, and what he saw stopped him completely. Kemi stood alone on a ladder adjusting giant flower arrangements while several workers packed equipment nearby. She looked pale, exhausted, fragile, and yet still working. Min-Jun rushed forward immediately. Kemi, she nearly lost balance from surprise. You're home. He helped her down carefully. Why are you doing this yourself? Kemi gave a weak smile. Your mother wants everything perfect. Min-Jun noticed fresh burns on her hands. His expression hardened instantly. When did this happen? It's fine. No, it's not. Kemi quickly glanced around nervously. Please lower your voice. Min-Jun looked furious. You haven't been sleeping properly. I'm okay. Kemi. The exhaustion in her eyes finally broke his heart. I can handle it, she whispered. But Min-Jun suddenly grabbed her hands gently. They're shaking. Kemi tried smiling again. Then, unexpectedly, tears escaped instead. Min-Jun pulled her into his arms immediately. I'm sorry. Kemi buried her face against his chest. I tried so hard, she whispered painfully. I tried everything to make her accept me. Min-Jun closed his eyes. Because deep inside, he knew she never would. The next morning, Madame Kang summoned Kemi privately. Kemi entered the office quietly. You called for me? Madame Kang sat near the window reviewing invitation cards. Without looking up, she spoke. You embarrassed Min-Jun yesterday. Kemi blinked. What? You cried in front of him. Kemi lowered her eyes. I was tired. Madame Kang finally looked at her. Weakness destroys powerful men. Kemi remained silent. Then Madame Kang slowly pushed a black garment box across the table. Wear this during the party. Kemi frowned slightly. She opened the box and froze. Inside was a black MAID uniform. For several seconds, she could not breathe. Mother. Madame Kang's voice became cold. The guests do not need unnecessary confusion. Kemi stared at the uniform in disbelief. I am Min-Jun's wife. Madame Kang stood slowly. You are tolerated because my son insists on it. The words hit brutally. But you are not truly one of us. Kemi's eyes filled with tears. Madame Kang stepped closer. Wear the uniform. Then colder. Or leave this family permanently. Kemi's hands trembled violently around the garment box. That evening she locked herself inside the bedroom. When Min-Jun knocked, she quickly wiped her tears. Kemi? I'm changing. Min-Jun entered anyway, and immediately saw the MAID uniform lying on the bed. His expression changed instantly. What is this? Kemi looked away silently. Mother gave it to me. Min-Jun's anger exploded. She wants you to wear that? Kemi nodded weakly. No. She said guests shouldn't know I'm your wife. No. Min-Jun grabbed the uniform furiously. She has gone too far. Kemi quickly held his arm. Please don't fight with her again. She's humiliating you. I know. The pain in her voice silenced him. Kemi looked down. I'm tired, Min-Jun. That confession terrified him. Because for 10 years, Kemi had endured everything quietly. But now even she sounded broken. That night Min-Jun confronted his mother directly. You will not force Kemi to wear that uniform. Madame Kang remained calm while sipping tea. You are emotional again. She is my wife. She is a distraction. She is family. Madame Kang slammed her teacup down. She gave birth to daughters when this empire needs a son. Min-Jun stared at her in disbelief. They are children, not business investments. Madame Kang stepped closer. You speak like a weak man. And you speak like you have no heart. The room became deadly silent. Madame Kang's eyes sharpened dangerously. Everything you own exists because of me. Min-Jun clenched his fists. You cannot control every part of my life forever. Madame Kang's voice lowered. Yes, I can. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Madame Kang delivered the final blow. If that woman matters more to you than this empire. She pointed toward the mansion. Leave. Min-Jun's breathing became heavy. Because he knew his mother meant it. If he walked away, he would lose the business, the family fortune, his inheritance, everything. And Madame Kang knew exactly how to weaponize that fear. Later that night, Min-Jun sat alone in darkness thinking about Kemi, thinking about his daughters, thinking about the years of silence. And slowly, for the first time in his life, he began questioning whether fear had turned him into a coward. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. And comment below. Should Kemi leave the Kang family forever? Madam Kang's birthday arrived with terrifying perfection. By sunrise, the Kang mansion already looked like a royal palace. Luxury vehicles lined the massive entrance. Security teams filled the grounds. Reporters waited outside the estate gates hoping to catch glimpses of Korea's elite. Inside the mansion, staff rushed everywhere under intense pressure. And at the center of it all, Kemi had not slept. Dark circles rested beneath her tired eyes while she supervised final preparations in silence. The black maid uniform clung painfully to her body. Every time she looked down at it, humiliation burned inside her chest. But she endured it. For the twins. Always for the twins. One elderly cook looked at her sadly. Madam Kemi, you should rest for at least a few minutes. Kemi forced a smile. After the party. But you're shaking. I'm fine. Unfortunately, even her voice sounded weak now. Upstairs, Ji-woo and Seo-yeon prepared excitedly in beautiful matching dresses. But the moment they saw Kemi enter the room wearing the maid uniform, both girls froze. Seo-yeon frowned immediately. Mommy. Ji-woo's small face tightened. Why are you wearing that again? Kemi avoided their eyes. It's only for grandmother's event. But you're not a maid. The innocence in the child's voice almost broke her. Kemi knelt slowly beside them. Listen to me carefully, okay? The girls nodded. No matter what happens today, stay polite. Ji-woo crossed her arms stubbornly. But grandmother is mean to you. Kemi gently touched her daughter's cheek. Still, respect matters. The twins exchanged silent looks. And for the first time, Kemi noticed anger growing inside their little eyes. That frightened her more than Madam Kang. By evening, the mansion transformed into a sea of wealth and power. Politicians arrived with armed escorts. Corporate billionaires laughed loudly beside champagne towers. Women in designer gowns filled the ballroom. Everywhere cameras flashed. Meanwhile, Kemi moved quietly between tables serving drinks while pretending not to hear the whispers. Who is the African maid? She's beautiful for staff. She must work closely for the family. Each comment stabbed deeper. Near the grand staircase, Min-Jun watched everything silently. His eyes followed Kemi constantly. The uniform, the exhaustion, the humiliation. For years he had convinced himself he was protecting his family by keeping peace. But tonight, watching his wife treated like a servant in her own home finally made him hate himself. Then Madam Kang approached a group of elite guests proudly. One wealthy socialite smiled politely toward Kemi. Your household staff are very elegant. Madam Kang glanced at Kemi coldly. She knows her place. Min-Jun heard every word. His jaw tightened instantly. Nearby, the twins heard it too. Ji-woo looked confused. What does that mean? Seo-yeon quietly stared at her mother carrying trays across the ballroom. And suddenly, the pieces began connecting inside their minds. At that exact moment, the MC stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the incredible Madam Kang. The guests applauded loudly. Before the birthday presentation begins, Madam Kang's granddaughters have prepared a special message. The spotlight landed on Ji-woo and Seo-yeon. The crowd smiled warmly. The twins slowly walked toward the stage holding hands. Meanwhile, near the center tables, a drunken politician accidentally knocked over an entire wine glass. Dark red liquid splashed across the expensive marble floor. The man laughed carelessly. Oh no! Before any servant could move, Madam Kang spoke sharply. Kemi? The ballroom became quieter instantly. Clean it. Kemi froze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Min-Jun stepped forward slightly. But Kemi shook her head almost invisibly. Please. Not here. Not now. Slowly, painfully, Kemi knelt on the marble floor and began wiping the spilled wine. At the same time, the twins reached the stage. The MC handed Ji-woo the microphone. She smiled nervously at first. Then suddenly her eyes landed on her mother, kneeling, cleaning, in a maid uniform, while wealthy guests stared. Ji-woo stopped breathing. Seo-yeon's face crumpled emotionally. and something inside both children finally shattered. Jiwoo gripped the microphone tightly, then screamed, "Stop treating my mommy like a maid." The entire ballroom froze.
Completely.
Forks stopped moving. Music stopped. Even the staff looked shocked. Kemi's eyes widened in horror. Jiwoo, Seo-yeon suddenly pointed toward her mother. "That's not a servant." Her tiny voice cracked with tears. "That's our mommy." Gasps exploded across the hall. Guests turned toward Kemi in disbelief.
What?
"She's the wife." "Impossible. Why is she dressed like that?" Jiwoo's tears streamed uncontrollably. "You always make mommy cry." The child pointed directly at Madame Kang. "Mummy cooks every night. She works when everyone sleeps. Mummy's hands hurt because of you." The ballroom descended into chaos. Some guests looked horrified. Others whispered intensely. Several secretly recorded videos on their phones. Madame Kang's face darkened with fury. Enough, but Jiwoo refused to stop. "She's not a maid. That's our mother." Seo-yeon burst into tears. "Mommy cries in the kitchen when grandmother shouts at her." The guests stared at Kemi with growing shock and pity. One woman covered her mouth emotionally. Another businessman whispered, "This is disgraceful." Kemi felt her body trembling violently. Humiliation,
Exhaustion. Pain.
everything crashed into her at once. She lowered her head while still wiping the floor. Then suddenly a drop of blood landed on the white cloth. Her burned hand had reopened. Min-Jun saw it instantly, and something inside him finally broke. Years of obedience, years of fear, years of silence. Broken. He stormed forward. "Enough." The force in his voice stunned the entire room. Madame Kang stared at him. Min-Jun walked directly toward Kemi, then slowly helped her stand. His hands shook with rage. "She is my wife." Silence swallowed the ballroom. "She is not your servant." Madame Kang's voice became ice-cold. "You would embarrass this family publicly over that woman?" Min-Jun looked directly into her eyes.
No.
Then harder. "You embarrass this family." Gasps spread again. Nobody spoke to Madame Kang like this.
Ever.
"You forced the mother of my children to live like a servant for years." Min-Jun's voice cracked emotionally. "And I allowed it." Kemi stared at him in shock. The twins cried while hugging each other tightly. Madame Kang's breathing became uneven. "You are throwing away your empire because of emotions." Min-Jun looked at Kemi's injured hands, then at his daughters, then back at his mother.
No.
His eyes filled with painful realization. "I almost lost my family because I was too afraid to stand against you." The room remained deathly silent. Madame Kang pointed toward the ballroom doors. "Then leave." Several guests gasped. "You heard me." Her voice trembled with fury. "If this woman matters more than the Kang Empire," she pointed outside. "Get out." Min-Jun stared at her quietly. 10 years earlier, that threat would have destroyed him. But tonight, he looked at Kemi. Really looked at her. The exhaustion, the pain, the tears, and finally understood the truth. The Empire had already cost him too much. He slowly nodded. "Fine." Madame Kang's expression faltered for the first time. Min-Jun gently took Kemi's hand. "We're leaving." Kemi's eyes widened.
What?
"You heard me."
His voice softened.
"I should have chosen you a long time ago." The twins immediately ran toward their parents, crying happily. But before they could move farther, Kemi suddenly staggered. The ballroom blurred around her. Voices echoed distantly. Her body swayed violently. Min-Jun grabbed her instantly. "Kemi?" Her lips trembled weakly. "I'm tired." Then her eyes rolled backward, and she collapsed. The twins screamed, "Mummy!" Guests jumped from their seats. Several women panicked. Min-Jun dropped to his knees while holding Kemi desperately. "Kemi, open your eyes." But her body remained limp. Seo-yeon cried uncontrollably. "She's cold." Jiwoo turned toward Madame Kang with tears streaming down her face. "You hurt our mommy." That sentence hit the ballroom harder than any scream. For the first time in decades, Madame Kang looked shaken.
Not angry.
Shaken. As paramedics rushed into the mansion, Whispers spread among the guests. She worked herself unconscious. How could they treat her like this? This scandal will destroy the family image. But Min-Jun no longer cared about image. As he carried Kemi toward the ambulance, tears finally filled his eyes publicly. His daughters clung tightly beside him. And behind them, Madame Kang stood alone inside the massive ballroom. Surrounded by wealth. Surrounded by power. Yet somehow for the first time in her life, completely alone. The ambulance doors closed. Its sirens disappeared into the soul night. And inside the silent mansion, Madame Kang slowly looked down at the birthday cake nobody touched. Then toward the wine stain still visible on the marble floor. The stain Kemi never finished cleaning. If this story moved you emotionally, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. And tell us below, should Min-Jun forgive his mother after everything she did? Or should he walk away from the Kang Empire forever?